It has been an underwhelming offseason for the Philadelphia Phillies, to say the least, and I think I have officially figured out why. In addition to the salary and tax reasons that we have touched on in recent videos, I think I've cracked the code on the Phillies' philosophy for building out a bullpen. I want to dive into exactly what this is, why I kind of disagree with the philosophy here, and overall why we're seeing this Phillies team build out their bullpen the way that they currently are. So let's dive right into it. I want to start with the depth chart that we can see the names under contract for this Phillies team heading into next season. Of course, Matt Strahm back next season, one of the highest paid bullpen pitchers in baseball, and a guy that I have the utmost confidence in. Jose Alvarado below that, and we'll circle back to a little discussion about that. Jordan Romano, one of the more notable additions that I would say, a guy that they are believing can return to the form that he once showed. Was not the case last year, but I don't hate it out of a bargain bin attempt. Then there is Orion Kirkering, who continues to improve. I thought took some notable steps forward and could be growing into that potential closer this team is looking for, but I do think we're a couple years away from that discussion. Tanner Banks will be back with them next year. Jose Ruiz, who came on pretty strong throughout the second half of last season, and Joe Ross, another notable addition here. Now, what do all these names say to you? For starters, there's a mix-in of the new faces and the guys that were here last year, and it is specifically the new faces that I would like to touch on. Shout out to Alex Carr for this tweet here that really stirred me. He starts off by saying, I think it's a mistake for the Phillies to refrain from adding more to their bullpen. Estevez cost two of the club's better pitching prospects at the deadline last year. One would think they'd rather spend money to shore up a unit that is markedly weaker than it was last season. Where I will give the team some credit, however, they've been pulling premium relief seasons out of near nobodies for 4 to 5 years now. Jeff Hoffman, Orion Kirkering, Andrew Bellotti, the list goes on. If they are done, give Cotham some projects and see if he finds another one. And I do believe that is the thought process for this Phillies team, that they believe Caleb Cotham is so special as a pitching coach that he can develop these guys. Now, I have mixed feelings on how much that actually impacts things. I do believe coaching matters. There's no doubt about that to an extent. But I have a hard time believing that Caleb Cotham is able to, sculpt nothing into a statue, if that is the case here. Now, granted, the track record's impressive. A guy like Jeff Hoffman, I think, is probably the best example of this. Orion Kirkering, I don't think quite belongs on this list, as that was a guy who they drafted in the 5th round, have put on a pretty accelerated pipeline to the major leagues, but a guy who clearly had some pitching chops there. Hoffman was a guy who was on his way out of the major leagues and clearly has found himself, and while we have not heard the number or what team that he will be playing for next season, he's going to find himself on a pretty healthy paycheck. I know we've talked a little bit about it on the channel, but if he does want that starter pitch or wants to move back to a starting pitching role, I think it's a mistake from him from a career perspective, as I do think that he's found something pitching out of the bullpen, and it is a pretty vastly different skill set for what you need to bring to a team there. But wish him the best of luck, and we'll be rooting for Jeff wherever he lands up. And who knows, maybe I'll be surprised that they find a way to work a deal and that he does return. I'm not overly optimistic that is the case, as Dave Dombrowski did recently speak to reporters, and per Matt Gelb of The Athletic here said, Phillies plan to save Andrew Painter's innings for July-ish. Dave Dombrowski said, Painter will throw but not pitch games in spring training, then build in the minors at some point. As for the bullpen, Dombrowski indicated they are likely done adding. Now, one of my biggest complaints about this, I would say, is it's a really hopeful, optimistic attempt at building out a bullpen. Now, where I do think there is a little bit of weight here from the Phillies' perspective, bullpen pitchers are some of the most volatile athletes in any sport. That you can, if you want to look at the list of best relievers, that's going to be vastly different from a year in and year out standpoint. That is not the case. Just best baseball players. You know who those names are going to be in a year out. Best quarterbacks. You know who those names are going to be in a year in and year out standpoint. Best basketball players. You know the general consensus or that grouping that it's going to be. That is almost never the case with relievers. That there are those random outlier years that these guys can kind of latch on to have success. And I think that is really what this Phillies team is targeting. Each of these guys. Joe Ross is a guy who, while he pitched just fine last year, and to dive into his exact stats here, pitched in 25 games, 74 innings pitched, 7 home runs allowed, a 3.77 ERA, a 1.365 whip. Not awesome stuff here. That's 8.8 hits per 9 innings. This is a guy that they believe can return to form. And there is some room for optimism for Joe Ross here. I do want to pump this guy up a little bit. Shout out to David Esser, who tweets this out here. It says, Joe Ross's value in the regular season comes from his ability to give the Phillies length, but I think he has potential to take down some leverage spots come October. He had a 1.67 ERA and a 9.0 strikeouts per 9 rate last year as reliever. And I am very curious what the thought process is for Joe Ross, how they will elect to use this, that I do think that he's a guy who's one of the more versatile pieces, kind of looked at as a Spencer Turnbull replacement, but I think he's more than that. And it was disappointing that the Phillies did not have Turnbull for the final stretch in the playoffs last year. I'm not saying he was a difference maker or would have changed the Mets series overall, but I will say that was a nice piece to add. And I stylistically like that type of pitcher that can go multiple innings, can obviously lock up and give you one if that's all you need. And I think Joe Ross falling into that category here. Now, as far as the bullpen as a whole, I think another part of why the Phillies feel this way or taking this approach is it absolutely fell apart in the playoffs last year, and there's no way around acknowledging that is the case. And why that is particularly frustrating to me is I thought that last year was the year where the Phillies had fixed their bullpen problems. That was a strong unit from start to finish. That Jeff Hoffman, as much as we talked to him, and he was a guy right in the front line of falling apart in the actual playoffs, he was nasty throughout the entire regular season. Pitched in 68 games, 89 strikeouts across his 66.1 innings there, just 6 home runs allowed, a 2.17 ERA, and a .965 whip. That is real deal stuff there. That is high-level stuff, and he's earning himself a pretty paycheck as a result of it. But to touch on the bullpen as a whole, this is where things fell apart. To look at the ERA of the bullpen over the past 3 playoff runs in 2022, they 2.62 ERA. 2023, 2.23 ERA. And then last year, 11.37. Yeah, you are not going to win a lot of games if your bullpen's giving up an 11 cumulative ERA there. So cannot be the case moving forward for next year. But I understand the thought process of, and even I remember at the time, some of the quotes that Rob Thomson was giving, being like, I don't know what to do. These guys have been giving us awesome innings all season, and most specifically speaking about Hoffman and Strahm here, and they're not able to rise to the moment. Now, we get that playoff baseball is obviously a different stage than the regular season. I would say there's probably a more night and day difference in the baseball playoffs than just about any other sport. When you talk about the intensity, the atmosphere, all these guys, it takes big game pitchers. And sometimes guys that look like diamonds do crack on the biggest stage. That is what we saw last year, and that is why the Phillies do not want to go down the same path. As far as Estevez and Hoffman, Estevez is interesting to me because they obviously traded something to get him at the deadline. This felt like a final piece. Now, I kind of think it's the right call to let him walk. I think he's a good pitcher, not a great pitcher. And for a guy that they kind of needed to be a great pitcher based on the expectations and how things were set up, I think everything was kind of built upon him being the closer last year, and he wasn't quite that. Played with his food a little bit too much. For me personally, I like a closer that wants to go in and mow a guy down, that he's going to throw it as hard as he can and see if you can touch it. That is not quite Estevez, that he'll pitch around a guy, he'll force ground outs, he'll let a guy come on first base, allow a runner on, and then kind of pitch out of a jam. Just not my style of closer there. Now, granted, I'm being a nitpick and, grasping at straws for what exactly is the case here. But I do think that is something to put in. Now, another arm that I did want to bring up on the bullpen, for starters, I think they are banking on an Orion Kirkring leap this season. I think there's plenty of evidence and reason to believe that it's the case. I do think he took a notable step forward last year, still incredibly young. And a guy that, only had one full season of the majors. Think about his rookie season, that fast track that he was put on, only a handful of opportunities in the regular season before stepping into the playoffs. We kind of were talked into this belief that this was, strategy, that they did not want much film for opponents to go off. The reality is I think he was just thrown into a little bit more of a larger and more notable role in this Phillies team than he probably was ready for or expected to be. Now, the other name that I did want to bring up here is Jose Alvarado. I think there's a lot on the shoulders of Jose Alvarado this year, and to dive into what his stats for last year, it's not overly convincing. That what we saw from him in 66 games, he had a 4.09 ERA, a 1.249 whip there, allowed 49 hits, 6 home runs, 63 strikeouts in his 61.2 innings pitched, and I think with Alvarado specifically, that is a guy who is a night and day difference whether or not he has it or not. That you can tell right away when he's on the mound. If he's going to blow it right by you and throw his best stuff, he truly can be one of the best relievers in the sport of baseball. But there's plenty of times where that is not the case, and unfortunately, that was the version of Alvarado that we got for most of last year. And what's particularly frustrating about when he's falling apart, he straight up can't find the strike zone. We're talking walking guys, throwing it past the catcher, wild pitches all over the place, and that really can absolutely derail a game or a season if you're relying on him too heavily there. I hope he can return to form. I saw videos of him working out already this winter, and he looks slim. He looks trim. It's exciting stuff there, but I've seen Ben Simmons three-pointers in an open gym before, so I'm not ready to just talk myself into how he looks in his winter workouts. But I am hopeful that Alvarado can grow into a stable part of this bullpen. I still don't think the Phillies have done enough from the bullpen perspective. But to add one more kind of note to that, did want to pull up this from David Esser here and the exact part of it. This being the actual Bart. David quotes the Alex Carr tweet that says, "I think this is pretty much the Phillies' plan when it comes to filling the final high leverage innings. Give Gotham a full spring training or half a season to see if he can find another gem before giving up assets for an established arm at the deadline." So it does feel like the Phillies are playing a little bit of long game here. They're going to try this high risk outlook to start the year. And if they got to get aggressive at the trade deadline, that's what they'll do. We have not seen enough of that from Dave Dombrowski. Yes, he's made some moves to help this team, but not quite the go all in push that I think I wish they had in past seasons. I'm not ready to slam this contending window shut, but I do think that the Phillies have not put themselves in the best spot as I was hoping at this current point. But still plenty of offseason to go down. Still a lot of familiar faces and big names that have not picked their location yet. So who knows? Maybe Dave Dombrowski is moving in silence, and that we will have more to talk about from a positive standpoint. But for the time being, I think the Phillies are going to try and get creative out of the bullpen, and we will see how that works out for them. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. What do you think of that thought process from the Phillies' perspective there? And who is it that you have the most belief in this bullpen moving forward? Drop those thoughts below. As always, appreciate each and every one of you guys tuning into this video here. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like on this video. I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Phillies Digest. Peace.